What happens when the strongest man in America goes head-to-head with the unstoppable force of technology? Over a century ago, John Henry swung his mighty hammer not just against rock, but against the future itself. And today, we'll uncover whether his story was true, a legend, or a warning for us all. Welcome to History Unveiled, where we dig deep into the myths and mysteries that shaped America. In this episode, we journey back to the age of steam and steel, a time when railroads stretched across the land and one man's strength became the stuff of legend. But behind the songs and the stories lies a deeper question. Was John Henry real? And if he was, what does his fight mean for us in a world once again ruled by machines? What happens when the strength of a man meets the unstoppable force of a machine? When muscle and willpower clash against cold steel and steam? This is not just a story about a man named John Henry, it's the story of an era. A moment in history when America stood at the crossroads between human power and mechanical progress. In the late 19th century, America was changing faster than ever before. The age of steam had arrived. Railroads were slicing through mountains, linking coast to coast, and redefining what it meant to conquer nature. But with progress came fear that the machines built to help man might soon replace him. John Henry's legend begins right here, in that fragile space between hope and dread. He was said to be a steel-driving man, a worker who swung a heavy hammer to drive steel spikes into rock so the railroad tunnels could push through the mountains. His strength was unmatched, his rhythm perfect. Every strike of his hammer echoed like a drumbeat of human determination. But then came the challenge, the machine, the steam drill, a mechanical beast that could do the work of 10 men, faster and longer, without rest or fatigue. To the railroad companies, it was the future. To the men who worked the rails, it was a threat, a silent promise that one day their sweat, their muscle, their very purpose would no longer be needed. And in that tension between man and machine, John Henry emerged as the symbol of resistance. He stood for every laborer who ever feared being replaced by something they couldn't fight. The story goes that when the company brought the steam drill to the worksite, John Henry didn't step back. He stepped forward, he challenged it. This wasn't just a contest of strength, it was a battle of meaning. Could a man prove that his heart, his will, and his human spirit were stronger than iron and steam? That's the question that has echoed through more than a century of American folklore. But think about what that really means. The 1800s were not a gentle time for working men. Railroads were expanding across harsh landscapes, mountains, valleys, and tunnels carved by sheer human labor. The Industrial Revolution promised progress, but at a cost. Machines began to take over work that had once defined entire communities. The sound of a hammer striking steel was slowly replaced by the hiss of pistons and the grind of gears. And yet, John Henry refused to yield. He became the embodiment of defiance. His hammer wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of pride, of human worth. Each swing wasn't just about driving steel. It was about driving back the notion that people were disposable. That a man's strength, courage, and will could be measured by efficiency. The story of John Henry is a story of balance of what happens when progress threatens to erase humanity itself. In his time, it was the steam drill. Today, it's artificial intelligence, automation, and machines that think faster than we do. The tools have changed, but the fear remains the same. And that's why his legend endures. Because John Henry's struggle ISN, confined to the dusty railroads of the 1800s, is just reborn every time we ask, what makes us truly human in a world built by machines? When we picture John Henry, we imagine a towering figure, muscles rippling, sweat glistening, hammer raised high against the roar of the steam engine. But behind that image lies something more powerful than brute strength. It's the idea that no matter how fast or efficient machines become, they can never match the spirit that drives a person to stand up, fight, and prove their worth. The railroad companies saw machines as the answer to progress. Workers saw them as a challenge to survival, and John Henry, he saw them as both. To him, it wasn't about stopping change. It was about showing that progress should never come at the cost of human dignity. As the story goes, crowds gathered to watch. The air was thick with smoke and tension. The steam drill hissed and pounded into the rock. John Henry took his stance beside it. The signal was given. He swung his hammer once, then again, each strike landing in perfect rhythm, faster and harder than the machine beside him. Sweat poured from his brow, muscles strained, the tunnel filled with echoing thunder. Man and machine, locked in a race that would decide more than just who could dig faster. This was about legacy, about proving that flesh and bone, guided by heart and soul, could still hold their own against the cold perfection of mechanical precision. As the two competitors drove deeper into the mountain, time seemed to blur. Witnesses said the sparks flew like lightning, and the sound was deafening, a symphony of man and machine battling for supremacy. And while no one knew it then, this moment would become one of the most powerful metaphors in American folklore, the fight to stay human in a world built for progress. Because John Henry S. story isn't just about who won or lost, it's about what that struggle meant. It's about the question that still haunts us today every time we hand our work, our art, our purpose to a machine. Can the human spirit ever be replaced? To understand the legend of John Henry, we have to go back in time to an America rebuilding itself after the Civil War. The year was somewhere between 1866 and 1873, a time when the country was healing from deep wounds and reinventing itself through iron, steam, and grit. The railroads were spreading like veins across the body of a new nation, connecting towns, industries, and people who had once been divided by distance and war. Amid this booming age of progress, there were ordinary men who built those tracks with nothing but their hands. Freed slaves, immigrants, poor farmers, and wandering laborers who picked up hammers, shovels, and drills to carve tunnels through unforgiving mountains. They were the backbone of America's new frontier, though history rarely spoke their names. But one name rose above the rest: John Henry. His story begins somewhere in the heart of the South, though no one agrees exactly where. Some say he was born in North Carolina, others claim Virginia, and a few stories place his birth in Tennessee. What all these versions share is the image of a man born into struggle, a man who came into this world during slavery or just as freedom was being declared. A man who knew the meaning of labor, of hardship, and of pride. According to the old folk songs, John Henry was a baby sitting on his mama's knee, and he picked up a hammer and said, "This'll be the death of me." Those words, sung across generations, weren't just lyrics, they were prophecy. From the very beginning, John Henry's destiny was tied to his hammer, a symbol of strength but also of sacrifice. When the Reconstruction era began, the South's economy depended heavily on the railroads. Companies were desperate to lay track fast and cheap, and thousands of men were hired for brutal, backbreaking work. The most dangerous of all was tunneling, driving steel rods into rock so that explosives could blast through mountains. It was in one of these tunnels, legends say, that John Henry earned his name. The most famous location tied to his story is the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia. Built between 1870 and 1872, it stretched over 1.25 miles through solid rock, a massive undertaking that demanded relentless human labor. Workers were paid little, fed poorly, and expected to endure suffocating heat and clouds of dust so thick that men would emerge coughing blood. It was here, they say, that John Henry proved himself. But before he became a legend, he was one of many, just another strong man among a sea of laborers who worked from sunrise to sunset. What set him apart wasn't just his strength. It was his rhythm, his speed, his endurance. People claimed he could drive steel faster than any two men combined, that he could swing his hammer all day without slowing, and that every strike landed true. His hammer sang when it hit the steel, ringing through the tunnels like music. The songs say John Henry worked alongside his fellow laborers, men who looked up to him as both hero and brother. In an age where machines were slowly creeping into every corner of life, John Henry represented something pure and unbreakable: human will. His body was strong, but it was his spirit that made him legendary. The earliest known versions of his story were passed by word of mouth, carried by the same workers who laid the tracks across the nation. They sang about him as they worked, their voices rising over the clang of hammers. John Henry was a steel-driving man. He died with his hammer in his hand. Lord, Lord, he died with his hammer in his hand. Each verse carried pieces of history, fragments of truth, and echoes of myth. No one wrote these songs in a book. They were living, breathing memories sung by men who knew the life John Henry lived. Through them, his legend grew, crossing state lines, changing details, but keeping one thing constant. John Henry was real to the people who needed him to be. And that's where the mystery deepens. Historians have spent decades trying to separate fact from folklore. Was John Henry an actual man who worked at Big Ben Tunnel, or was he a creation of many men's stories woven into one? There are records that hint at a man fitting his description, a convict leased from a prison in Alabama to work the railroads. In those days, convict leasing was common, and the men forced into labor were treated no better than slaves. Some believe John Henry was one of them, a man whose strength and defiance were remembered long after his name vanished from official records. Others argue he was a free man, a skilled worker who volunteered for the hardest jobs and became a symbol of pride for black laborers during Reconstruction. No one can say for sure, but the fact that his name survived when so many others didn't says something powerful. John Henry became more than a man. He became the embodiment of resilience, the voice of every worker who refused to be broken by the weight of progress. His origins, whether in truth or legend, reflect the heartbeat of an America trying to define itself. A nation built by hands that would never be recorded in history books, yet whose work still stands in the iron rails stretching across the land. John Henry's story begins in that forgotten world, a world of smoke, sweat, and song, where men's lives were measured in inches of tunnel dug and the sound of hammers striking steel. And somewhere in that world, a man picked up his hammer, stood before a mountain of rock, and began a story that would echo across centuries. The legend of John Henry reaches its breaking point in one defining moment, a contest that would decide not just a man's fate, but the meaning of human strength itself. The story goes that one hot summer morning, deep in the mountains of West Virginia, a strange machine arrived at the worksite. It was massive, made of steel and iron, powered by steam and pride. The company men called it the steam drill. It hissed and roared, its pistons pumping like a living thing, and it promised one simple thing: to do the job faster than any man ever could. The workers watched it with quiet dread. They had spent years driving steel by hand, their hammers rising and falling in perfect rhythm, their sweat and effort carving tunnels through solid rock. Now this machine stood before them, and the whispers began. If that machine works, what happens to us? Men who had known nothing but hard labor saw their futures trembling in the steam, but John Henry, standing among them, didn't flinch. The legend says he walked up to the company boss, wiped the sweat from his brow, and said, "That machine can't beat me. A man made it, and a man can beat it." His voice was steady, his eyes fixed on the roaring drill. That was the challenge, the moment when flesh and iron were set on a collision course. The boss, half amused and half intrigued, agreed to the contest. If John Henry could drive more steel than the machine, the men would keep their jobs. If not, progress would roll on. Without them, the stage was set. Man against machine, hammer against piston, heart against mechanism. When the day came, the mountain echoed with tension. The workers gathered, their tools dropped, their voices hushed. The company officials watched from a safe distance, their suits pressed and clean, ready to witness what they believed would be the machine's inevitable triumph. The steam drill was primed and gleaming, its pipes spitting clouds of vapor into the hot air. John Henry stood beside it, shirt off, muscles coiled, two 20-pound hammers gripped tightly in his hands. The signal was given. The steam drill lurched to life with a metallic shriek, hammering into the rock with mechanical precision. But before its echo could fade, John Henry swung his hammer. Once, twice, over and over again, his rhythm building, his strikes ringing like a drumbeat that the earth itself could feel. The air filled with the sound metal striking stone, steam roaring beside it, the mountain trembling beneath their duel. They say John Henry didn't just swing his hammer, he danced with it. His movements were fluid, relentless, perfectly timed. His arms blurred with motion, and sweat poured from him like rain. Every blow he struck seemed to carry more than muscle, it carried defiance. Each swing said, "I'm still here. I'm still stronger." The steam drill pounded beside him, steady and tireless, its hiss turning into a roar. It didn't sweat, it didn't breathe, it didn't tire. It just kept going, cold and constant. But John Henry's hammer never missed. With every strike, his breath came harder, his chest heaved, his heart pounded like a second hammer inside his ribs. The crowd could feel it, the pulse of a man fighting not just a machine, but an idea. Hours passed. Dust filled the air so thick it was hard to see who was winning. The workers shouted encouragement, singing the old work songs that had always kept their rhythm steady. "This is for us," one man whispered. "He's doing this for all of us." And then slowly, the impossible began to happen. The machine started to slow. Its pipes sputtered, its pistons hissed unevenly. The drill jammed against the rock, its rhythm faltering. But John Henry, he didn't stop. He kept swinging, faster, harder, his face set in pure determination. The ground trembled with every strike. The sound of the steam drill began to fade, overtaken by the echoing rhythm of his hammer. When the dust finally settled, the tunnel wall cracked open. John Henry had beaten the machine. He had driven his steel deeper, faster, further. The mountain had given way not to gears and steam, but to sheer human will. The men erupted in cheers, their voices bouncing off the stone walls, echoing through the valley outside. For that moment, humanity had triumphed. But in the midst of celebration, John Henry stood still. His chest was heaving, his skin glistening with sweat. His hammer slipped slightly from his grip as he leaned against the wall he'd conquered. The story says his heart was pounding faster than any machine could ever move, the same heart that had fueled every strike. He smiled, a small, quiet smile of victory, and kept his hammer close. The contest was over, but its meaning was only beginning. In that dark tunnel, with the sound of the last hammer blow still hanging in the air, something eternal had been written. The men saw that John Henry had proven something greater than strength. He had shown that a man's worth is nt measured by speed or precision, it measured by the fire inside him, by his refusal to surrender even when the odds are impossible. And though the steam drill would be repaired, though machines would continue to spread across America, that day remained burned into the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. The tale spread down the rail lines, carried in song, told and retold by those who worked the tracks. John Henry's hammer became a symbol. His struggle a story of pride and humanity's stand against the mechanical tide that was already reshaping the world. Some said they could still hear the echo of his hammer in the tunnels long after he was gone, like a heartbeat carved into the mountain itself, a reminder that for one brief shining moment a man had faced the future and held his ground. The dust had barely settled in the tunnel. The mountain was quiet now, except for the faint echo of a hammer that seemed to linger in the stone. John Henry had done what no man thought possible. He had faced the great steam drill, and he had won. The workers crowded around him, their cheers echoing like thunder in the narrow passageway. They lifted their hats, their voices, their hearts, celebrating the man who had proven that human strength and determination could still triumph over the march of machines. For that brief, shining moment, John Henry was more than a man. He was a legend made flesh, a living symbol of defiance, pride, and victory. The mountain had bowed before his will. The machine, for all its power and precision, had been humbled by the sweat and rhythm of a human hand. It was the kind of story that gave every laborer, every forgotten worker, a sense of hope. If John Henry could beat the machine, maybe man could hold his place in a changing world after all. But behind that celebration, there was something else, something quieter, heavier. The people cheering couldn't see the exhaustion that had crept into John Henry's eyes. They didn't hear the ragged sound of his breathing or notice the way he clutched his hammer tighter, as though it were the only thing holding him upright. His victory had come at a terrible cost. The songs say he drove steel until his heart gave out. Others say he took a final swing, the hammer fell from his hand, and he crumpled to the ground beside it. Some even claim he stumbled out of the tunnel, collapsed in the sunlight, and whispered, "This is the last drive I'll ever make." However it happened, the ending is always the same. John Henry's triumph was also his undoing. His strength, the very thing that made him a hero, had consumed him. As the men gathered around, the joy in their eyes turned to disbelief. The strongest man they'd ever known lay motionless, his chest no longer rising, his hammer resting beside him like a fallen crown. Silence filled the tunnel, a silence so deep it felt like the mountain itself was mourning. One of the workers knelt beside him, touched his shoulder, and said softly, "He beat the machine, but it cost him everything." And that's how legends are born, not from simple victories, but from sacrifices that cut deeper than words can express. John Henry's death wasn't just the end of a man's life. It was the beginning of a myth that carried meaning far beyond that tunnel. His story spread faster than the railroads he helped build. Workers sang about him in rhythm with their hammers, keeping his memory alive through the beat of steel against stone. Every strike was a tribute. Every verse was a vow that his fight would not be forgotten. John Henry died with a hammer in his hand, they sang. That image became immortal, the idea that even in death, he refused to let go of what made him human. His hammer wasn't just a tool. It was a symbol of labor, dignity, and the unbreakable spirit of every man and woman who worked with their hands. But the tragedy of John Henry runs deeper than the songs ever let on. It speaks to something in all of us, a truth about what happens when human pride meets progress. His death was a warning wrapped in triumph. He had proven that man could outmatch the machine, yes, but at what cost? His heart, his life, his very being became the price of that victory. And while the people around him celebrated, the world outside continued to change. Machines grew stronger, faster, more efficient. The same progress he had challenged rolled forward, unstoppable, indifferent to the memory of the man who had once stood against it. Still, the legend refused to fade. It took on a life of its own, whispered around campfires, sung by railroad crews, told to children as both inspiration and caution. Some believed John Henry's soul was bound to the rails he helped build, that his heartbeat echoed through every passing train. Others said that every time a hammer struck steel, it carried the rhythm of his spirit, the rhythm of a man who gave everything to prove that flesh and blood could still matter in a world of iron. His story doesn't end with sadness alone. There's beauty in his sacrifice, a sense of timeless dignity in the way he faced the inevitable. He didn't run from progress. He met it head-on, knowing it might destroy him. And maybe that's why his legend has lasted. Because deep down, every generation finds itself in the same struggle, facing new machines, new technologies, new fears that threaten to erase the human touch. John Henry's death turned him into something eternal. He became a symbol of what it means to fight for meaning in a world that values efficiency over soul. The image of him standing in that tunnel, hammer swinging, muscles straining, heart pounding, is burned into the collective memory of America. It's more than a story about railroads and steam drills. It's a story about us, about what we lose when we trade humanity for progress, and about the quiet, powerful defiance that lives in those who refuse to give up. The mountain took John Henry's body, but his spirit rose from it, carried in the rhythm of every song that bears his name. His victory may have ended in tragedy, but that tragedy gave birth to something that could never be beaten, not by any machine, not by time, not by progress itself. For more than a century, the name John Henry has echoed through American folklore like a hammer striking steel. But behind the songs, the legends, and the countless retellings, one question has refused to fade. Who was John Henry, really? Was he a flesh and blood man who once worked the rails? Or was he a story, a symbol, forged by generations of workers who needed a hero to believe in? The truth lies somewhere between history and myth, between the clang of a hammer and the whisper of a song. The story of John Henry has been told in 1,000 ways. Every singer, every storyteller adds a new detail, reshapes an old one. Some say he was born a slave, others that he was born free. Some claim he worked on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad, while others place him far south, in the hills of Alabama or the plains of Tennessee. No matter the version, one thing remains constant. He was strong, he was proud, and he died proving the worth of human hands. But historians, ever hungry for the truth behind the legend, began digging for evidence. And what they found only deepened the mystery. In the late 1800s, during the construction of the Big Bend Tunnel in West Virginia, there were indeed reports of a steel driver named John Henry. The work there was brutal tunnels cut through solid rock, long hours in suffocating air, and the constant danger of collapse. It was the kind of place where legends could be born. Some researchers point to prison records from Alabama, where convicts were leased out to railroad companies to do dangerous work under horrific conditions. Among them, they found mention of a strong, quiet man named John Henry, who died on the job around the same time the legend began to spread. Could he have been the real John Henry? Or was his name just one of many carried into myth by those who lived to tell the tale? The folk songs offer clues, but also contradictions. One version sings of John Henry working at Big Bend Tunnel. Another places him at Lewis Tunnel, not far away. Some say he was buried in the shade of a white oak tree. Others say they laid him in the sand by the railroad line. The details shift like smoke, refusing to settle, as if the story itself doesn't want to be pinned down. And maybe that's the point, because John Henry isn't just one man. He's every man who ever swung a hammer, broke a sweat, and fought against the inevitability of change. He's the collective voice of the laborers who built America, who faced the rise of the machine with nothing but calloused hands and unbreakable resolve. Whether or not there was a single John Henry, there were thousands of men who lived and died just like him. His myth gave them a name, a face, and a heartbeat that history would otherwise have forgotten. Still, there's something haunting about the idea that he might have been real. Imagine a man who didn't know he was becoming a legend, a man who simply did his job, day after day, until one moment of defiance turned him into an icon. It's possible that John Henry never knew his story would travel the world, that his struggle would become poetry and song, that his name would be spoken long after the railroads he built were replaced by highways and wires. What makes John Henry different from other folk heroes is how human his story feels. He wasn't a king, a cowboy, or a gunslinger. He didn't seek fame or glory. He was a worker, an ordinary man caught in the gears of progress, who fought to prove that he and people like him still mattered. That's what gives the legend its power. It's not just a tale of strength, it's a cry for recognition, a reminder that every bridge, every tunnel, every track was built by hands like his. Over time, John Henry's story evolved. It became a song of endurance for African American workers in the Reconstruction era, a rallying cry for laborers during the rise of industrial America, and later, a metaphor for anyone resisting the cold, unfeeling advance of technology. He was no longer just a man. He was an idea, one that grew and shifted with each generation that retold his story. Some scholars even argue that John Henry became a myth on purpose. At a time when freedmen and laborers had little voice in the national story, the legend gave them one. It transformed anonymous workers into heroes and turned the fight for dignity into an enduring part of American identity. John Henry was more than folklore, he was resistance in musical form. And yet, the line between myth and memory remains blurred. The ballads may exaggerate his feats, but they also preserve a deeper truth. Every verse, every rhythm carries the emotion of real people who lived through that era. When they sang about John Henry, they weren't just telling a story, they were mourning, celebrating, and defying all at once. Through him, they found a way to say, "We matter. We are not machines." Even today, the debate continues. Historians still search for evidence, a grave, a record, a name scratched in a ledger that could prove once and for all that John Henry lived. But perhaps that mystery is what keeps his legend alive. If we knew exactly who he was, he might belong to history. Because we don't, he belongs to everyone. John Henry stands at the crossroads of fact and fiction, where truth meets belief. Whether he was one man or many, real or imagined, he embodies something larger than himself, the eternal struggle between progress and humanity, between muscle and machine, between the story we live and the story we leave behind. More than 100 years have passed since John Henry swung his hammer against the roaring steam drill, but somehow his story feels more alive today than ever. The world has changed. The railroads he helped build have become highways and data lines. And the machines he fought against have evolved into something far more complex, machines that think, learn, and even create. And yet, the question at the heart of John Henry's legend still lingers in our world today. What happens to human worth in an age ruled by technology? We live in a time when progress moves faster than thought. Artificial intelligence writes, paints, and makes decisions once believed to require human intuition. Robots build cars, algorithms trade stocks, and machines diagnose diseases. Everywhere we look, the story of man versus machine has returned, but in a form John Henry could never have imagined. The steam drill is now digital, the mountain is made of data, but the struggle? The struggle is the same. When John Henry faced that steam drill, he wasn't just competing for pride. He was fighting for identity. He wanted to prove that a man's value couldn't be replaced by efficiency or speed. That same fear now echoes across boardrooms, factories, and classrooms. People wonder if the work they've done their whole lives, their creativity, their craftsmanship, their knowledge might one day be handed over to an algorithm that does it faster, cheaper, and without a heartbeat. That's what makes John Henry's story timeless. His legend isn't just a tale about the past, it's a mirror reflecting our present. The hammers may have changed, but the question remains the same. What makes us human when machines can do what we do? Is it strength, creativity, emotion? The story forces us to look inward and ask ourselves what we truly bring to the world that no machine ever can. In a way, John Henry's defiance is more than a moment in history, it's a message for the future. He reminds us that progress doesn't have to mean surrender. He didn't reject the steam drill because he hated innovation. He stood against it to remind everyone that progress must never come at the cost of humanity. His hammer was a declaration, a heartbeat turned into action. It said, "We are not obsolete," and that's something we need to remember now more than ever. As technology shapes every corner of modern life, people are searching for meaning beyond efficiency. We marvel at the convenience of automation, but we also crave authenticity. We love the precision of machines, but we still want to feel the warmth of something made by human hands. John Henry's struggle captures that contradiction perfectly. It's the eternal tug-of-war between convenience and soul, between perfection and passion. His story also reminds us that not all progress is progress for everyone. In his time, the steam drill symbolized power owned by companies that cared more about profit than the people who made it possible. Today, many workers face a similar battle. Automation promises to make life easier, but it also threatens jobs, livelihoods, and entire industries. Just like the men who stood beside John Henry, many fear being left behind by the very progress they helped build. But perhaps the lesson of John Henry isn't just about resistance, it's about resilience. He didn't stop the world from changing, but he showed that human spirit could still stand tall in the face of it. His victory, even in death, became a promise that no machine could erase the heartbeat of human determination. In that sense, his story isn't tragic, it's transformative. It tells us that even when the future feels overwhelming, we still hold something machines can't replicate: courage, empathy, and purpose. When we hear his story today, it's easy to imagine that hammer is a metaphor for something more. It's the artist's brush, the teacher's lesson, the worker's craft, the thinker's idea, the tools that define who we are and what we do. Every time someone creates something with passion, fights for fairness, or refuses to be replaced by convenience, they swing their own kind of hammer. They keep John Henry's rhythm alive, and maybe that's why his legend refuses to fade. Because deep down, we all know that progress without humanity isn't really progress, it's just motion. John Henry's story reminds us that strength isn't measured in speed or power, but in the will to stand for something that matters. The steam drill may have represented the future, but John Henry represented something eternal, the heartbeat that drives it. Even today, artists sing his songs, writers retell his legend, and workers in factories and offices still talk about the John Henry spirit, that refusal to let the machine define the man. His name has become shorthand for determination, for giving everything you have even when the odds are impossible. It's an ideal that still inspires people in every field, from technology to art, from labor to leadership. In every generation, a new version of the steam drill appears, whether it's automation, artificial intelligence, or the next great invention that promises to change everything. And every generation faces the same choice John Henry did: to surrender to the machine, or to prove that there's still something sacred about being human. His legend doesn't tell us to reject progress. It tells us to build it with conscience, to never forget the people whose hands, minds, and hearts make it possible. So, as the world races forward, the story of John Henry continues to echo in the background, a rhythmic beat reminding us that our worth isn't defined by what we produce, but by what we believe in. He may have fought his battle in a tunnel of stone, but his struggle belongs to all of us who stand in the shadow of machines and choose, once more, to pick up the hammer. So, after all the dust has settled and the echoes of that mighty hammer fade into history, what truly remains of John Henry the man, the legend, the mystery? Was he a real person who fought a machine until his heart gave out? Or was he a symbol, crafted from the spirit of countless laborers who built America with their hands, sweat, and sacrifice? The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between. John Henry may have been flesh and blood once, but over time, he became something far greater, a reminder of what it means to be human in a world that often forgets the value of humanity. His story began in the age of steam and steel, yet its rhythm still beats in our modern world of wires and code. He represents every person who's ever stood their ground against impossible odds, every worker who's refused to be erased by progress, every soul who's believed that heart and will can still outshine the machine. When we remember John Henry, we don't just honor a man, we honor an idea. The belief that strength isn't just in the muscles, but in the spirit. That dignity isn't given by a paycheck, but earned through purpose. And that even when the world changes faster than we can grasp, there will always be those who remind us of what truly matters. Because the legend of John Henry isn't about the hammer, the drill, or even the mountain, it's about the heartbeat behind it all. It's about courage that defies limits, passion that defies progress, and humanity that refuses to fade away. So, as we move forward into a future shaped by innovation and technology, may we carry John Henry's spirit with us, not to fight against progress, but to guide it, to remind the world that no matter how advanced our machines become, the truest power still lies in the heart that dares to swing the hammer, one last time for the sake of being human.